The golden era of bodybuilding, known as the Golden Era, was characterized by the pursuit of symmetry, proportion, and aesthetics. Legendary athletes like Arnold Schwarzenegger, Frank Zane, and Mike Mincer represented a generation of bodybuilders who sculpted physiques that looked like true works of art carved from iron. This era, immortalized by perfectly balanced physiques, brought forth some of the most impressive bodies ever seen. Competitors showcased incredibly narrow waists, broad torsos, and the famous V-taper, all combined with powerful arms and impressive physical strength. Many of these athletes also ventured into powerlifting, proving that they weren't just about aesthetic muscles, but also functional ones, with displays of strength and endurance that left audiences in awe. The Golden Era continues to be admired today and shaped bodybuilding as we know it, influencing generations of athletes worldwide. But what exactly was this era, and how did it impact bodybuilding globally? That's what I'm going to tell you in this video. But before we begin, I need your help to keep the channel active and continue bringing you this type of content. If you enjoy my work, consider becoming a member. Believe me, it's something that doesn't weigh on your wallet, but it makes all the difference in helping me continue producing quality videos for you. If this is your first time here, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and hit the notification bell so you never miss any updates. This helps YouTube recognize that this content should be shared with more people, and you won't miss any upcoming videos. Oh, and we're aiming to reach 5,000 subscribers by the end of the year, so I'm counting on you to help me hit that goal. Let's do this. The Golden Era of bodybuilding is widely recognized as one of the most significant periods in the sport's history. Spanning primarily from the late 1960s to the early 1980s, this era revolutionized how bodybuilding was practiced and perceived. However, some argue that the roots of this era can be traced back to the mid-1950s, continuing through the 1970s. During these years, a new standard of physique was established, marked by the pursuit of an ideal combination of muscle mass, symmetry, and aesthetic proportions. Athletes like Arnold Schwarzenegger, Frank Zane, and Sergio Oliva stood out, shaping bodies that looked as though they were straight out of Greek statues. They weren't just interested in getting bigger and gaining mass. They wanted to build physiques that were harmonious and exuded both strength and beauty. The philosophy of the Golden Era differed from other periods of bodybuilding by focusing on aesthetics much more than on simply increasing muscle size. Bodybuilders aimed to achieve a perfect balance between each muscle group, with the goal of creating a physique that was both massive and graceful. Narrow waists and well-defined abs contrasted with broad, muscular torsos, creating the iconic V-taper that is still widely revered today. It wasn't just about brute strength, but about crafting a true work of physical art. For these athletes, bodybuilding was comparable to sculpture. The body was the marble, and intense training was the chisel that shaped the ideal of athletic beauty. The most famous representative of this era, Arnold Schwarzenegger, exemplified this mindset perfectly. With his imposing yet aesthetically balanced physique, he embodied the ideal of a modern Greek god. Arnold and his contemporaries were inspired by ancient Greek and Roman statues, figures that represented the combination of strength, symmetry, and human perfection. This ideal transcended competitions and became a standard sought by bodybuilders worldwide. Many of the physiques sculpted during this era are still highly coveted, even decades later, serving as a reference for generations of new athletes striving to reach the pinnacle of muscular aesthetics. During this period, bodybuilding also began to gain more attention from the media and the general public. The combination of charisma, impressive physiques, and a philosophy that promoted the balance between body and mind turned these athletes into true cultural icons. Arnold Schwarzenegger, for example, not only dominated the stage but also expanded his career into cinema, becoming one of Hollywood's biggest stars. Other athletes from the Golden Era, such as Franco Columbu and Lou Ferrigno, followed similar paths, taking bodybuilding beyond competitions and turning it into a globally admired lifestyle. The influence of the Golden Era on modern bodybuilding is undeniable. Even with the evolution of the sport and the pursuit of ever larger and more defined physiques, the principles of symmetry, proportion, and aesthetics established during that time are still revered. Contemporary athletes frequently cite the legends of the Golden Era as their greatest inspirations, and many competitors still attempt to recreate that perfect balance that was so highly valued in the past. The Golden Era was not just a phase in bodybuilding, but a timeless landmark that continues to shape the vision of what the human body can achieve when dedicated to aesthetic perfection and physical development. The characteristics that define the Golden Era physique are unique and remain a benchmark of aesthetics and balance in bodybuilding. The concept of a body with a small waist, broad shoulders, and the famous V-taper didn't happen by chance. This iconic shape was the result of years of training focused not just on muscle mass, but on creating a visual harmony reminiscent of Greek statues. The bodybuilders of the Golden Era paid attention to every detail, from the muscle volume to how the muscles flowed from one part of the body to the next. Large but delicately sculpted chests and incredibly strong arms were trademarks that helped create an image of power and perfection. However, this pursuit of symmetry went beyond just the upper body. While the legs were less emphasized compared to modern bodybuilders, they were still developed to ensure proportions that aligned with the Greek ideal. The focus on aesthetics didn't end in the gym. It extended to the stage, where Golden Era bodybuilders became true artists during competitions. They knew that the right pose could completely transform the audience's perception of their physique. For this reason, each presentation was meticulously planned to highlight strengths and minimize any flaws. Arnold Schwarzenegger, Serge Nubret, Mike Mincer, and Frank Zane are prime examples of athletes who mastered this art. Their poses were not just demonstrations of brute strength, but a true visual spectacle, capturing the essence of bodybuilding as an art form. They used the stage to showcase a physique that not only impressed but also inspired an entire generation to seek the balance between aesthetics and strength. However, this era of harmonious physiques came to an end as bodybuilding underwent a radical shift in the following decades. The quest for the perfect, balanced, and aesthetic physique gave way to a new philosophy: the obsession with extreme size. Modern bodybuilding pushed the limits of the human body to unprecedented levels. The primary focus shifted away from symmetry and proportion to the uncontrolled increase in muscle mass, with competitors seeking ever more volume in their physiques, sometimes at the expense of the harmony that was central during the Golden Era. This led to a clear division in what is considered the ideal physique. While the physiques of the Golden Era were maintained within a standard that exalted classic aesthetics, modern bodybuilders prioritized size, and this shift directly impacted competition judging. Raw strength and excessive mass began to be valued over symmetry and aesthetic appeal. This transition had visible consequences, altering the perception of what an ideal physique should be. Many athletes and fans still look at the physiques of the Golden Era with admiration and nostalgia, considering them timeless examples of how bodybuilding should be approached. A true living work of art, sculpted to perfection. Today, this era is remembered as a landmark in bodybuilding history, not only for its impressive physiques, but also for the philosophy behind them. The Golden Era represented more than just a quest for medals and trophies. It was a celebration of the human ability to create beauty and strength in equal measure. Although bodybuilding has evolved in a new direction, with athletes focused on pushing the boundaries of muscle mass, the aesthetic essence and pursuit of perfect proportion from the Golden Era still resonate in competitions and gyms worldwide. The question remains: will modern bodybuilding ever return to valuing the classic beauty that defined the Golden Era, or are we destined to continue exploring the limits of size without considering balance? Although knowledge about nutrition, supplementation, and exercise has significantly improved over the decades, many fans and even athletes continue to prefer the look of Golden Era bodybuilders compared to modern competitors. Today's athletes are generally much larger, but this size comes with a more bloated appearance and, for many, a less healthy look. The reason for this drastic change is largely attributed to the use of different types of steroids, especially the more aggressive doses that began to be used starting in the 1980s. During the Golden Era, the focus wasn't on absolute size, but on the aesthetics, proportion, and symmetry of the physique. Athletes sought a relatively natural appearance, with physiques that balanced muscle mass and body harmony. However, with the introduction of growth hormone, HGH, and insulin, a new era of bodybuilding began to take shape, forever changing the perception of what was considered an ideal physique. These new compounds helped create the first mass monsters, with athletes like Dorian Yates and Ronnie Coleman. These bodybuilders took size to a completely different level, presenting extremely massive and dense physiques that dominated competitions. However, the price of this evolution was the loss of the classic aesthetics that defined the golden era. The use of HGH and insulin brought visible side effects, such as increased visceral fat and the expansion of the intestines, creating what became known as GH gut or growth belly. This negative aesthetic effect compromised athletes' waistlines, resulting in physiques that, although impressive in size, lost the symmetry and proportion that were so valued in previous decades. If we look at today's bodybuilders, it's clear that the size achieved is something that even the biggest competitors of the golden era could never have dreamed of reaching. The level of muscle mass seen today borders on the superhuman, with athletes displaying physiques that seem straight out of a science fiction movie. The most notable example of this transformation is Ronnie Coleman, considered by many to be the greatest bodybuilder of all time. With 8 Mr. Olympia titles, Coleman was a true powerhouse, with muscles so dense and voluminous that, when placed next to competitors from the 1970s, he would almost seem like a figure from another world. His dominance in the sport symbolizes bodybuilding's transition to an era where size became the primary criterion for success, leaving behind the aesthetic standards that once formed the foundation of the sport. However, despite the impact of athletes like Coleman and Yates, many enthusiasts of the sport still prefer the physiques of the golden era. Thinner waists, more harmonious proportions, and a balanced aesthetic continue to be the most desired standards for those who view bodybuilding as an art form. Nostalgia for this physical style led to the creation of a new division in competitive bodybuilding, Classic Physique, launched in 2016. This category was born with the goal of bringing back the class and symmetry of golden era physiques, celebrating bodies that value aesthetics as much as muscle mass. Classic Physique quickly became the most popular category in modern bodybuilding, attracting not only a large fan base but also athletes who seek to showcase more proportional and harmonious physiques. The success of Classic Physique demonstrates that, although modern bodybuilding has pushed the limits of the human body in terms of size, the demand for more aesthetic and proportional physiques has never disappeared. In fact, many consider that this category represents the future of the sport, a return to the ideals that made the golden era such a revered period. Classic Physique athletes are praised for their ability to balance muscle size with symmetry and proportion, something that has been lost in open bodybuilding, where the goal is often just to be the biggest. With the growing popularity of this category, we see a renewed appreciation for what made the golden era the golden age of bodybuilding, and the hope that the future of the sport will continue to celebrate not only strength and size, but also the aesthetic beauty of the human body. During the golden era, bodybuilders trained in a much more instinctive manner, relying on their own experience and observations to determine what worked. Unlike today's practices, many of these athletes devoted themselves to training sessions that lasted several hours, something that would now be classified as overtraining and strongly avoided. However, at that time, they proved that this method delivered results. Arnold Schwarzenegger, for example, used this intense training style to develop lagging body parts, like his calves. He was known for applying intensive techniques to overcome his weaknesses, something many modern athletes shy away from. Similarly, Platz was famous for his insane leg workouts, which included squatting for up to 4 hours straight, leading him to develop the most iconic legs in bodybuilding history. At that time, there were fewer scientific studies on the human body and the specific impact of different training approaches. This meant that many of these athletes were their own living test subjects, experimenting with different methods and routines to discover what worked best for their physiques. There was no solid scientific foundation guiding their workouts, making everything a matter of trial and error. This approach was bold, and even without the technological and scientific advances we have today, they managed to sculpt legendary physiques that are still revered. This mentality of training to the limit, pushing the body and driving it to extremes, is nearly extinct in modern bodybuilding. Nowadays, many people only follow a routine if it is validated by scientific studies or recommended by major names in the fitness industry. Contemporary bodybuilders rely much more on pre-established data and information, basing their training programs on research about efficiency and recovery. While this has brought a more technical and precise approach to bodybuilding, it has also lost some of the instinctive intensity that characterized the golden era. Today, training is more programmed and controlled, ensuring greater safety, but perhaps not the same level of physical and mental exploration that the giants of that time experienced. The difference between these two approaches shows how much bodybuilding has evolved, but it also highlights the relentless pursuit of results that drove the athletes of the golden era. For them, there were no clear limits to what was possible. They constantly challenged themselves and, in many cases, achieved feats that would seem absurd today, such as training a single muscle group for hours on end. Although modern bodybuilding has refined its methods, the raw passion and intensity of the golden era workouts continue to inspire many of today's athletes. After all, those men were more than just athletes. They were true pioneers, exploring the unknown territories of what the human body was capable of enduring and achieving. In the golden era, supplements were extremely limited, and bodybuilders' diets were composed almost exclusively of real food. Unlike today, where there are countless advanced supplements available, back then there were only basic vitamins, proteins, and a few other essentials. Despite this, these athletes still achieved impressive results, shaping some of the most aesthetic and powerful physiques in bodybuilding history. Their diets revolved around simple foods like meat, eggs, and cheese, which, while it might seem monotonous by today's standards, worked incredibly well. Lean red meat, for instance, was one of the most popular choices because it not only helped build muscle mass but also provided strength. Chicken, now the most popular protein among bodybuilders, was second in line back then. The use of whole eggs was also common practice, and the fat in the yolk wasn't feared as it is in modern times. In fact, they believed that this fat was a valuable energy source, preventing it from being stored as body fat. Cottage cheese was another widely consumed food due to its richness in protein and calcium, supporting muscle growth and bone strength. Their diets were high in protein and fat, with moderate or sometimes even low carbohydrate intake. This combination not only facilitated muscle gain, but also helped with the definition and symmetry that became trademarks of the golden era. These athletes lived by the mentality that eating in large quantities was essential for growth. The focus wasn't solely on building muscle, but on creating balanced, symmetrical, and aesthetically perfect bodies. Despite lacking the technological and nutritional resources we have today, bodybuilders of that era optimized their diets and training to achieve results that are still considered examples of physical perfection. Many modern bodybuilders, despite having access to more advanced supplements and sophisticated meal plans, continue to admire and often attempt to emulate the dietary strategies of the greats from the golden era. The simplicity of their nutrition, coupled with extreme discipline, was the key to these results. Eating large quantities of protein and fat-rich foods allowed them to develop strength and muscle mass without the excess calories often associated with modern diets packed with processed carbohydrates. This retro approach to nutrition, based on natural and minimally processed foods, proved incredibly effective and helped shape some of the greatest physiques the world has ever seen. Even today, with all the nutritional science available, many believe that this dietary strategy remains one of the most effective for those seeking not only size but also aesthetics and balance. In the golden era, gyms were much smaller and vastly different from the massive, machine-filled facilities we see today. Equipment was limited, focusing on dumbbells, barbells, and far fewer machines. This, unbeknownst to them at the time, turned out to be a great advantage. The lack of machines forced them to perform more free-weight exercises, which we now know to be far more effective for building strength and muscle mass. Compound or multi-joint movements, such as deadlifts, barbell bench presses, squats, and overhead presses, were the foundation of their training. These exercises engage multiple muscle groups simultaneously, maximizing growth and strength far more intensely than many machine-based isolation exercises. While they did incorporate isolation exercises to sculpt and detail their muscles, the core of their training was based on compound movements. The bodybuilders of that time used similar repetition ranges to today's professionals, but what really set them apart was the intensity with which they trained. Arnold Schwarzenegger has mentioned in interviews that, before the filming of Pumping Iron, he would get physically ill from pushing himself so hard in his workouts. That classic documentary not only showcases Arnold's life, but also gives insight into the intensity with which they trained. Each golden era athlete found a personal way to adapt their body to heavy training, using instinct to discover what worked best. This led them to push the limits of their physical and mental capabilities in every training session. In their relentless pursuit of the perfect body, athletic, muscular, and strong. This training philosophy, where instinct was just as important as technique, is one of the reasons why bodybuilders from the golden era were able to build such unique physiques. They believed that every body was different, and that to reach its full potential, training had to be tailored to individual needs. Nowadays, with gyms full of machines and routines based on science, this approach may seem outdated, but it worked incredibly well for those pioneers. Now, tell me, what do you think of this golden era training philosophy? Would you prefer a physique like Arnold's, with a slim waist and perfect proportions, or do you prefer modern bodybuilders with more volume and massive muscles? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your opinion. And before you go, make sure to hit that like button and share this video with your friends who need to learn more about the history of bodybuilding. Your interaction really helps the channel grow and motivates me to keep bringing you content like this. Oh, and if you're not subscribed yet, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any upcoming videos. I've set a goal to reach 5,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and I'm counting on you to help me get there. Let's do this.